I greet you once again after this first break we made. Now, shortly, I'd like to introduce you Giovanni Contini, who is an excellent scholar in memory studies, cultural studies, who has very well established international relations across the states and also in Japan. He's currently President Emeritus of the Italian Association for Oral History. And Giovanni, I greet you heartily here in.
Yes, just a second because the phone is phoning. The telephone rang just at the exact moment.
Yeah.
Well, let me start.
Yes,
very precisely. Well, I must say I was very much impressed yesterday by Nena Moshnik's speech because I realized that during my research on the consequences of massacres in Italy in 1944, and even during my work at the Shoah Foundation, I was there for 9 months. The same thing happened to me, although in a less serious way. And I think everybody working at Shoah Foundation had problems related to this contact with such a terrible kind of experiences. Anyway, today I would like to, maybe as an historian, we are perhaps very ignorant about the psychology of trauma and post-traumatic effects. But the fact that we found them, and also what is interesting, I think, is that historians can detect and can study these consequences during the time. I mean, for decades, for tens of years, you can see what effects a trauma can cause, both from an individual and from a collective point of view. I will start with this memory of in the villages who were struck by the German army in 1944. 24,000 people were killed. Many of them were children and women and old men, and these people were just living in very small villages. The purpose for these massacres was just to create a sort of terror atmosphere. I mean, to create a situation in which civilians were not going to help the partisans in the area. And in fact, the massacres always happen in the areas where partisans were operating or could have operated. Sometimes there were no partisans at all, but the situation was favorable for the resistance. And very often the killing were without any relationship with some action of partisans. Sometimes there was some relation with the presence of partisans. But I say that the purpose of the perpetrators to cut in advance any link between civilians and partisans was very effective. In fact, this hostility toward partisans remained till we did our research 50 years later. I call this collective memory, who gave the responsibility for what had happened, not to the perpetrators, but to the partisans and to the partisan action. I call it divided memory. It is a memory which is a collective memory. and which is present more or less in all the places where the massacre took place. It is interesting to see how different was the situation of the people, of the survivors, toward the real perpetrator and toward to the partisan. In a sense, partisans became such sort of scapegoats because they had just the stigma of the scapegoats because they scapegoats because they were internal to community but not completely internal. They were, people knew their names, they knew them personally, but they were not from the same village. Anyway, they became the responsible. And the perpetrators instead were treated as if they were not human beings responsible for their acts, but as if they were just wild forces of nature. It means like earthquake, volcano, tempest, a lion. Very often the lion occurs in the description. You don't stimulate a lion because you know what a lion is going to do. Anyway, so this is the situation. After the massacres, this memory became very strong, and what is interesting is that in order to explain why that happened, I think that we must take in consideration the fact that the massacres were just, as I said, happen in small villages. You know, when you lose some person in your family, in a town, I mean, you are not always confronting other people having had the same problem. You know, you have moments in which you behave as if nothing had happened. And instead, that was impossible in small villages because the killing had been around. Every corner of the village remembered the people. The people were saying, "Oh, the corpse of Marius was just there." I remember, you know, and everybody who was meeting, everybody was talking about the same thing. So this memory was somehow fermenting, and the elaboration of the experience was simply impossible. Actually, it was in fact it was interesting to see that this memory was always a female memory. Very often, men had been killed or were not present at the moment of the killing because they were elsewhere. They were on the front line, or they were hiding with partisans. And so I remember I was very impressed listening this endless tale of the massacre, because I got the impression that it was like the Penelope's canvas, you know. The impression was that women were just telling this story endlessly, as if a meticulous reconstruction of the events, having hundreds of small partial stories, was making possible an impossible task to ensure that the massacre had never happened. I really had this feeling. Anyway, the women were then not only producing this divided memory, they also imposed a lifestyle which was very severe. They never remarried. They were always dressed in black. Even the daughters were supposed to dress, or if not in black, with some sign on them, saying how many people had been killed in the family and so on. And that was pretty very difficult framework for young people. So young boys actually were just going around collecting unexploded bullets and bombs and and doing very dangerous things and against and they tell that they had a fight with the widows. They said the women didn't want that. It was and even less they wanted what the younger boys and girls were doing, just dancing. To dance were just you shouldn't have fun. I mean, you should not forget. The morning had to continue over time. So again, this was the situation. The young people at first reacted, becoming more violent. They all say that this is an effect of the trauma, which also was caused by the fact that the fathers had been killed. The financial situation of the family had deteriorated a lot. And also because they were forced to go to study outside and they were just war orphans, and so they were discriminated by other children. So they became very violent. They recognized that. When they came back to the village became a sort of holiday place, and they were just walking around this village still ruined. I quote from a person I interviewed. I walked around this rubble. I remember the steps where I had been playing as a child. I have photographs of these steps. Of the destroyed house, only the external entrance steps remain. Then I found a family photo where everyone was on the steps on the old happy days. I mean, he lost his father and his grandfather during the massacre. Then progressively, it is very interesting to see what happened next, because progressively the hostility toward this divided memory started to decrease, and the young people, not young anymore, they started to absorb this and this memory. And when I was there interviewing them, it was clear that they were sharing completely the point of view, this sort of memory worldview elaborated by their mothers, the widow mothers. So, now I think I think that oral history was extremely interesting and important to do this kind of research, because until when we started to do this research, this memory had been confined to the local communities, and the general memory was the resistance memory, and very softly it was said that this anti-partisan memory was somehow clerical, fascist, right-wing. I found this judgment incorrect, because I think that the making of this memory was completely different, and as I said, oral history was extremely important in order to put this memory out. I mean, to eliminate this kind of memory, which had been sort of secret memory belonging to the communities and not being known by anybody else. Actually, I was also accused of making these things known by everybody at the time. As I also think that oral history is very important to study what happened after the liberation from the concentration camps. and not only to detect what happened in the camps, but particularly after that, in the long-term consequences of this terrible experience. Because people who were there, they not only experience an extreme degree of violence, which is well known, but also they experience what Primo Levi called a gray area. I mean, I quote him, with ill-defined contours, which together separates and joins the side of the masters and that of the servants, of the slaves. It has an incredibly complicated internal structure, and it contains enough within itself to confuse our judgment. Well, that means that people in the camp, in the lager, had lost their moral framework, and they were forced to see and also to do things that were very difficult to tell once this moral framework was restored after the liberation. So this is the reason why I think very few people were able to describe in writings this experience. And I think all the great historians were just able, great writers, Primo Levi, in fact, was one of them, was able to get into this very ambiguous and embarrassing kind of tale. But with oral history, this is much, much easier, because people don't write about that, but when asked, they can, not always, but they can tell you something. I mean, I've been working at the Shoah Foundation for a long time, and I actually came across many times to this with this kind of embarrassing problems. But I would like to talk about what I found in an oral archive created by a psychiatrist, Andrea Devoto, in the mid-80s, when still, so I think 10 years before the interviews organized by the Oral Shoah Foundation. At the time, many survivors were still alive, and he was able to interview people in the right way, also because his professional knowledge allowed him to question in a very stimulating way. And it is interesting that he was operating just before the concentration camp memory was absorbed by the Shoah memory. So many people among the people he interviewed were not Jews, but they were political prisoners. And in fact, what came out from what they say, they were not, many of them, 80% of them were not political at all. They were just young proletarians who went to work a day when the clandestine network, communist network, had organized a strike. So they arrived to the factory and they told them there is a strike. And what is a strike? You don't work. So they were just going around in the town, and they were just considered dangerous anti-fascist militant by the Italian fascists who arrested them and then gave them to the Germans, and they ended up in Dachau, in Ebensee, Mauthausen. And once there, since they were not political militants, they couldn't enjoy the protection of the clandestine network organized in the camps by the anti-fascist militants, and so they were given the worst job, and they were just unable to understand what the capos were asking them. they didn't have much education. They didn't understand, not even Italian in a sense, but certainly not German. And these people actually were the people the Voto interviewed, and came out from this kind of interview a very, very vivid reconstruction of even of the most embarrassing moment and experiences in the camp. I would just quote some of them. Quote, another very interesting thing, the separation from your loved one. You must not believe that everyone in the camp thought about home sweet home. We no longer thought of anything. We became like animals, no more memory of our father or mother or girlfriend or love, nothing. Another quote, beside those who remembered and cried, they died. Actually, our humanity had been destroyed so that there was only one law in the concentration camp. Grab what you can. Theft was not considered theft anymore. It was considered almost an act of bravery. To steal bread from someone who kept it hidden, because we weren't supposed to keep anything, right, was considered almost a brilliant act. And there are those who can tell things even more heavy. For instance, this one. There was a girl, poor things, she was more dead than alive. She had 2 or 3 pieces of bread. The poor thing was sick. She seemed unable to eat. In short, I found this piece of bread and ate them. Then she was looking for her bread. Mary, did you see it? No, I didn't. Instead, I had already eaten it. So, and there are many of these description. I mean, of this. But I also say, as I was saying, it is also very interesting to see what happened after. I mean, not even immediately after, but even 10, 20, 30 years later. People say that they lost the capacity to sleep, and they had persecution dreams. They were not believed when they told what had happened to them. For instance, one of them says, at home they thought we were crazy. I think my mother thought he came back a bit cracked, this guy. Or there are also people who start to believe that what they remember was not real. I mean, and for instance, this person said, when I returned to Mauthausen a few years ago, we visited the cemetery where there were records of all the names of the dead. Leafing through this log, I went to look for the name of a person who was with me there in Mauthausen. He was from Milan. And when I saw his name on the register, I said, so I really knew him. It seemed to me that it was just a fantasy. So, and this is also quite frequent. Also frequent the incapacity to tell. Even if someone encouraged me to talk, after 2 or 3 minutes, I would feel a lump in my throat. Anger about what I went through would come over me and would begin to cry. Another one, insomnia, changes in personality. I became mistrustful, suspicious, touchy. Before I had a completely different character. In short, I went through a great transformation and very nervous. I became nervous with my family. Luckily enough, my wife was able to love me anyway. Other people, I changed tell that they changed the experience changed their personality. Again, I cry over nothing. I'm not very sociable. I get emotional about everything. And he said, this is a result of imprisonment. I left as a young man, and when I came back, I was an old man. Well, and so it is quite interesting to see how the prisoners, after many years, how they tell how difficult was the return home. It was very difficult to cope with their own relatives, who were at the time very much involved in the process of rebuilding Italy economy, the Italian miracle. They were just set aside. They couldn't participate in this. And that happened till the end of their lives, more or less. Yesterday, somebody said that people traumatized for social and political reasons cannot be treated in a medical way, because and this is exactly what happened instead to these people. Their suffering was very much related to the experience they had, but it's seen as mental problems, and very little. They were helped very little in order to at the time the experience was not yet common. Was just it remained sort of experience in the family, experience in the small groups or group of friends. Well, so if this was the situation, the psychological situation of the survivors, I think that it is also very interesting, would be very interesting, because this is a research which is largely to be done, with the second generation, what kind of effects these events had with the second and third generation. In Italy, we have very little about that at the moment, and we have instead a lot, as you know, in America, in Israel. I mean, you know, Marian Hirsch post memory writings. You know, very interesting to understand the condition of the second generation. Memory, that he's not a memory, according to Hirsch, because he doesn't have real experience behind. It is instead a construction of the imagination, through which the life story of the parents replaces that of the children. They remember, they think they remember the memories of others, and this can have very serious consequences. Another very well-known person, Adina Vardi, a psychoanalyst in Israel, she wrote a very interesting book, Candles of Memory, and she was just focusing on children of the Shoah survivors, and she realized that because some of them had terrible problems. They couldn't maintain a job. They couldn't maintain an emotional relationship. Some of them they were just trying to commit suicide, and she started to make this analysis, collective analysis, and these people realized that they had more or less the same symptoms, but also they had the same relationship with their families as a young boys and girls. Briefly, what had happened was just in the family. The parents were not able to elaborate the mourning, this memory. And so unconsciously they choose some of the most sensitive children, and imposed to them, again, in a very unconscious way, the impossible task to elaborate a mourning which was not their own, which was the mourning they were not able to elaborate by their own. Impossible because the children didn't have the experience. And you can elaborate only something which you experience directly, so not at first hand. I was saying, in Italy, we have not much we don't have enough, much research on this kind of topic. I mean, among the children of the concentration camp survivors, I found now they all died more or less, and so the children are now 80, 90-year-olds. So, and it's very embarrassing because they tend in some to behave as if they were ventriloquists, talking the words of their dead fathers. But and again, you can see that even them, they had this problem not being able to elaborate something which was not their own experience, and very little research was done, direct research on them. So they talk in public, but in the sense they're just repeating what the dead parents, fathers used to say when they were alive. I started a research on this topic, but in fact, COVID stopped me. So I have just a few examples. Well, for instance, I interviewed a man whose father was in Auschwitz, and he lost his first wife and daughter and remarried. And he said that he had been very, very full of admiration for his father because he thought he was a hero. But actually his father was not able to talk much with him and also to get too intimate with him. And he said, because perhaps he couldn't afford to lose even me. The previous was too strong. And so he tried to be a perfect student. At school, he had full marks. And after, when he had to decide what to do with his life, he had a terrible breakdown. He wanted to commit suicide, and didn't do that because of his father, not to give this terrible pain to his father. And again, his symptoms and his story is very much is very similar to the story of the patient of Dina Vardi in Israel. So it is. But what is very interesting is the same thing, more or less, even less serious, happened with the children of the people who remarried in Italy after the civilian massacres in 1944. For example, I was just a few examples. The most striking is this one in Bardine San Terenzo, which is a small village in Lunigiana, which is near Massa Carrara, Apuane Mountains. I don't know if you know this place. This man, Mario Ligeri, he had a tavern in this village, and he was serving lunch to Walter Raeder, while at the same time Raeder's unit was killing his wife in another place and 5 children. He remarried and had 2 more children. And again, what is very interesting that I interviewed both of them. The older say that this tragedy didn't have an effect on him. The only problem for him was his father was older than other people's fathers during when I went to school, but apart from that, no problems. Instead, the younger Roberto, he had a very, he told me that the massacre was present in the house all the time, and that his father was not joking, he was not laughing. He once they gave him as a young boy a small gun, and his father brought it, saying, well, too many guns in this house, and somebody who had given this present was expelled from the house. And the even worse was a brother, an unmarried brother of his father, who was terribly pessimistic. He was very. Roberto said that he didn't have seen him laughing once. He said spiritually he had ceased to live then after the massacre. He sarcastically destroyed every plan I put for. Everything you presented to him was a denial. He could not tolerate any enthusiasm. A world of pessimism, a flat world. And so he came out wondering, but did I come to the world to do what? So he said the president was also physically present in the house, because pictures of the previous family were everywhere. In the dining room, there was a large picture with all the people, with all the brothers they killed. And small other photos were around with the small votive lamps underneath. And I mean, their names came out all the time with the vocabularies and other school books. And again, like in the previous speech, nobody was talking about that. So it was a very disturbing dissociation between the presence in the behavior and in the images and in the things around in the house, and the fact that nobody was talking about what had happened. Thank you very much. I hope I was in time, yes.
Giovanni, thank you very much for this highly interesting presentation, and thank you also for being on time. So we have time for several questions. We can actually skip the break if you want and go directly to Alenka. So we have about 15 minutes of interaction. But so is there anyone who would like to? Urshka, yes, Urshka Lampe, please ask.
Thank you, and thank you, Professor Contini, for this very interesting and for opening this important topic. I find it extremely interesting because this is something that I'm dealing with now, especially with this transmission of memory and trauma between generations, which is not studied, has not been studied so much this far, has been studied with victims of or survivors of concentration camps for some extent, but I'm dealing with prisoners of war, so this is a similar yet different topic. I would just like, I was thinking, I just started with this my research, and with this COVID situation has not gone that far, but it came to my mind when reading these stories and thinking about it that probably, especially this transmission of trauma or memory is especially a consequence of the post-World War II society not dealing with these traumatic effects of this experience. So we have to understand that after World War II, nobody was dealing, or rarely, just some doctors, and the majority of those survivors of those camps did not have treatment, medical treatment, and so on for years. it just started some years after when it was realized that they were suffering the effects of these traumatic events. So and especially nobody was dealing with the families. I'm working now with the families of those former prisoners of war, the second generation, the third generation. So nobody was dealing with them, the children of those. So I would like to ask, what was your impression about just what I said? Yeah.
Yes, sure. This is, I agree. Although you must say that the problems were just real problems, but it is sure that they became much greater because the surrounding people were not participating to this kind of they didn't want to understand. Actually, it is very interesting because they say nobody wanted to listen to us. I think that is true, but not completely true. I think that people were listening to them, but the problem was they were different. They were doing different things. They were more enthusiastic about the new life, because everybody after the war wanted to start a new life, to forget. That is, and this is a problem that all the survivors had. I was quoting Primo Levi. Do you remember this terrible thing? If you forget, you sort of. He said terrible things about people who forget, but everybody was forgetting, and even if they were listening, it was just as if they were listening to somebody who had a psychological problem. A person in the family is slightly crazy, but and actually these prisoners, so-called political but not political, were also very unlucky, because they died without having had a total recognition of their condition, which is actually what happened to survivors of the Shoah after the Schindler's List, after the formation of the Shoah Foundation project. And although in the Shoah Foundation problem, there is the interviews, there is another problem, that the tendency to end with an happy end, which something, it's clear that is something that the interviewer is just trying to insert in the conversation, and the structure itself of the interview, which ends with family and children and grandchildren, is going in this direction. From this point of view, the interviews done by Andrea Devoto were more realistic, because at the time, nobody, political prisoner, Jewish prisoner, survivors, were not proposing any happy end. It was clear that just one person among all these people, the people interviewed by Devoto, was saying, I felt better. I felt I had became a better person after this experience. All the others said that no, that just ruined my life. And but yes, I think that the problem of the context for these people was absolutely crucial. And in fact, when they formed this association, they started to talk about that with other people having then the same experience. Some of them say, I was only able to talk and to stay well with people who had had the same experience like me. We retreated in our shells like snails, he said, one of them. Because even the relatives were not much interested in that.
Okay, Marta has raised her hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Giovanni, for this very interesting talk. I have one question about the ambiguity. Before Ani Ahmed mentioned the presence of ambiguity in the testimonies in Lipa. No? I think that I have um, mm, quite different explaining of the ambiguity. I think that the ambiguity is always present in the testimonies, and it's not linked with the more distance of the event, because I remember a lot the talking, my grandfather talking, and also the family talking. And in this memory is always present the ambiguity about the presence of the Nazi, especially Wehrmacht soldiers in the village, and so on. But I have the question about the civilians executions and the ambiguity in the memory uh, uh, in this place. Or another question about the difference between the female and man memory about the event, about the violence. We have differences or not, and or the memory is very strong in all cases without ambiguity about them happen. Thank you.
Yes, start with the last question. There is certainly a deep difference between the memories of women and men. As far as I can see, that men tend not to talk. After the massacre, for instance, in the villages struck by the 1944 massacres, the people say that the people coming back home because they were at war or somewhere else, or were hiding, they couldn't tell the story. They didn't participate to this collective reconstruction of the event, of collective tale of the event, which was typical of the women. According to the people in the village, this silence was also very dangerous, and these people, they say, they died very soon. They were just unable to mitigate their suffering. They were just thinking about, and this is one thing. About the ambiguity of the memory, about the fact that very often some good persecutor comes out, you know, the good Germans or the good fascists. That's very, I don't know if this is a real experience, or if this is a way in which people try to persuade themselves that that there is some hope, that not all the perpetrators are really evil, that there is some good. Sometimes also we found that this is also real. But the fact that everybody was remembering just that, I think it is very meaningful. I think it has this kind of meaning. For instance, in the case of the previous speech, there were two Germans who were impressed by the lady and decided not to burn her house. That's very strange, because usually what comes out usually is that that was possible when there was just one German or one fascist confronting some, for instance, in the most terrible killing in Italy, Sant'Anna di Stazzema. there are people who managed to escape from the massacre because they found a German who told them, went away, run away, run away. And they ran away and they were saved. But it was alone, because the problem is when the two, that's the reason why always two carabinieri, not just one, because they can control each other. I mean, and so the fact that they were two and they were both benevolent is a very interesting thing, or very strange thing to say.
Okay, Anna, you rose hand as well, please. You may address the question.
Yes, thank you so much for this talk. And I was wondering if you found other examples besides the ones of people who retreated into their shells and didn't talk and didn't transmit much in the second generations. And so talking about post-memory, or people who turn trauma, or maybe that's a big word, but whatever, bad memories into memory activism. I was thinking about this because in your exam, in this part of history that you're dealing with, I was thinking about Leonardo Paggi's activism in the 90s as a historian activism that brought more, I mean, you were doing work and Portelli and etc., but Paggi really brought this personal push, to this memory. But also, I was just thinking, I was just writing Anya Medvedev. I was thinking, and again, I cannot talk for her, but it seems to me that one way for the second and third generation, in a case of dealing with the trauma their grandmother experienced, as being with turning into all these feelings into memory activism. They are doing the documentary to preserve the woman in Lipa who has a museum.
In the museum. Yeah. No, you're right. Paggi is a friend of mine, and actually he invited me to participate to this research, and I went to Civitella in Val di Chiana, which was his village, and I went there to say, no, I cannot participate to this research because I am too busy. And when I saw people not yet born at the time talking about the massacre as if, which was 50 years before, as if they had happened just a week before, I was absolutely impressed and decided just to change my mind. And actually, the memory of the steps was Paggi's memory. And he certainly, he's the most, positive example of somebody able to transform. Although he also told me that he saw that at the time he was just 3 years old, changed his own personality. He was, even Leonardo told me, I became much more violent and much more nervous, and even some colors disturbed me, and some smell continued to persecute me. But he was able to do that, and actually he organized this amazing international conference in AISO, which was the beginning of all our researches on this topic. Even the person I was talking about, Roberto Oligeri, the one who was the only one, the son of a father who remarried, and he was telling about how sad was his life. He is also very active. Actually, again, after the interview with me, he became much more active. This is another interesting story, because he was also participating to this celebration and commemoration of the killing. But then later on, I told him, you are a memory candle. He said, what is the memory candle? And he started to study his own experience from this point of view, which was, I think, very positive for him. And he became much, much more active. Yes, like Leonardo. Mm.
I think we ran out of time for further questions. Although also I have some questions, but I may write you an email with okay. Thank you, Giovanni. And now I would like to introduce shortly Alenka Bartulovic. She's also my colleague